Wicked has made its way off of Broadway and into movie theaters. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Zach, and I started this YouTube channel because I just cannot watch a movie without having to talk about it afterwards. If you find yourself the same way, you're in the right place, my friend. Consider hitting that subscribe button. And while you're at it, I want this to be a conversation, a dialogue between me and you. So jump down in the comment section below. Tell me, what are your thoughts on Wicked? Have you seen it? Are you planning on seeing it? Or are you just going to defy gravity away from this thing? And what is your experience with Wicked? Have you seen the Broadway musical? I, for one, have not seen the Broadway musical. And going into Wicked, I can't say that I was like super excited for this movie all year round. I knew it was coming. I saw the promotional trailer for it pretty much in every movie I went to see this year. That trailer was like 3 minutes long. It went on forever. That movie ends up being 3 hours long, so I guess the trailer was proper marketing in that regards. But the trailers themselves, they didn't really entice me all that much. I like Ariana Grande. I grew up with her watching Victorious as Kat on that show. I'm not that familiar with Cynthia Erivo's work, but the trailers themselves, they looked gorgeous. The production definitely looked like it had the scale and money put into it to be an epic. And once my wife found out this was coming out, she was insistent that we were going to see this together. So I knew one way or the other, I was going to be watching Wicked. So, walking into that auditorium, I heard the positive buzz. The early word of mouth for this was very positive. So, let's get into my thoughts. What worked about Wicked? And honestly, guys, without even burying the lead here, Wicked was phenomenal. The thing that I love the most about movies, it takes basically a whole community for people to come together and bring to life someone's vision. And I love when all of the pieces of the elements of filmmaking come together, complement, and help to elevate each other. And that's exactly what you get here with Wicked. From top to bottom, everything here just felt immaculate. Starting with the incredible production, because going into Wicked, I knew that it was connected to Wizard of Oz. I knew that it was about how the Wicked Witch became the Wicked Witch. But what I wasn't expecting was the world building of Wicked, how they were able to take the world of Oz, expand upon it, and go deeper into the lore, into the various corners of this universe. And this movie looks gorgeous. The cinematography here is firing on all cylinders. Every single frame of this thing is popping with color, with vibrance. It looks appealing to the eye for the whole 3 hours. On top of that, with this being a musical, the musical sequences in here are incredibly well done. Like I said, I haven't seen the Broadway musical, so this was my first exposure to a lot of these songs. But even just the direction and the staging of the musical sequences themselves, they are all incredible and almost hypnotic to look at. There are some really cool and dynamic ways that they decided to shoot a lot of these musical sequences. There's one musical sequence in particular that takes place in like a library, but the books on the shelves are kind of like hamster wheels and they keep turning, and they use that environment to basically choreograph a whole dance sequence with dozens of extras in the background. It absolutely blew me away. The unisons and all of the work that went into bringing this choreography onto the screen and looking fantastic as it does really showed off here, and it was from top to bottom perfection. Speaking of perfection, another thing that's working here definitely to Wicked's advantage is the performances by Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo. I grew up with Ariana Grande. I watched her on Victorious. I've seen her as an actress. I know a lot of people are this is their first exposure to Ariana Grande as an actress. She's much more known as a pop star nowadays, but I always knew that she could act. But she has definitely grown, as she should, from her days of Victorious. And in this movie, she was without a doubt sensational. I was extremely captivated by Ariana Grande's performance, because there's a lot of things that Ariana Grande has to do in her performance. She's kind of the mean girl, but she also has to endear you. She has to be charming. She's got a lot of comedic beats that she has to hit, and she knocks all of it out of the park. And of course, she's got a killer voice, so she sounds phenomenal with the musical sequences. But that's not taking anything away from Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba in here, the Wicked Witch, or soon to be Wicked Witch. She has to give such a sympathetic performance. You are immediately endeared to her character. You're on her side. You feel bad from her. They go really into just how tragic of a backstory this character really has, and the underlining anger that is there for her character that will eventually be used to become the Wicked Witch. She is able to pull off both sides of that simultaneously, where you can see how that anger festers in her that she could become the Wicked Witch, but at the same time you're just like, oh man, she becomes the Wicked Witch. And that's something that Wicked did that I was not expecting. I loved these characters when they are at odds with each other, when they are teaming up and they're friends, whatever they are doing. Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo have phenomenal chemistry throughout this entire film. They are the engine that keeps this film running, and they are one of the reasons why, with this 3-hour running time, yes, you feel it because it's like 2 hours and 45 minutes. You're gonna feel that in any movie, but I was never bored because the performances were always just so captivating. There was always layers, there was always new dynamics brought to them that kept the characters interesting to me, and I also was rooting for both of these characters the entire time. That when you remember how this is gonna go, that she does become the Wicked Witch of the West, and they're gonna be at odds even more at some point down the line in the future, it's devastating to think about. And also in the cast here, you got Michelle Yeoh, and you've also got Jeff Goldblum. And look, Michelle Yeoh is definitely in it more than Jeff Goldblum. She does a great job. But Jeff Goldblum, when he does pop in here as the Wizard of Oz, he is just great. Jeff Goldblum, you just throw Jeff Goldblum into any room, into any scenario, he can just make it work. You love him. He's got the he's got the uhs. It sounds like he's just coming up with things on the spot. And he works, all of that works for him as the Wizard of Oz in this film, especially what the character has to be and ends up being. Jeff Goldblum was just fantastic. He was such a bright spot when he popped up in this film. But alright, I'm gushing about this movie enough. Let's move on to what did not work about Wicked for me. And honestly, the section here of what didn't work for Wicked, I could probably rename to the small gripes that might not mean anything in a year from now about Wicked. Because this is a part 1 to the story, which was really funny because they're not marketing this as a part 1. And in the movie theater, when the Wicked title came up and they added part 1 to the title, I could hear in my auditorium, there was some murmurings. There were some people that were not expecting this to be a part 1. And this is very much a part 1. There are side characters, there are subplots and storylines in the background of this movie that don't really go anywhere by the end of this film, to the point that you feel like they could have been cut out of the film, but I don't know how they're going to conclude in part 2. For example, there's a love triangle going on between this prince, Galinda, and Elphaba that I didn't really feel like needed to add to the running time as much as it did. I'm sure if you're a purist of the musical, you're calling this blasphemy that I would think of cutting anything out. But in the movie itself, it just kind of felt like an element where they could have at least scaled back on it a little bit. There's also this kind of mystery going on with something that's happening to the animals that live in Oz, and I won't go into any more detail to avoid spoilers. I felt like that storyline needed to be fleshed out a little bit more for me to truly care and invest in it like I feel like the movie wanted me to. I am intrigued to see where it goes in part 2. I just didn't find it that compelling or even that interesting in this part 1. But like I said, there's really little about this movie that I feel like didn't work. You could complain about the runtime, but for me, I honestly was impressed with how well and how paced the movie felt for me for a runtime as long as it is. The performances are killer. The characters, I love them. I want to spend more time with them. I walked into this feeling like, oh man, this is a part 1. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. I was a little bit hesitant about that. I walked out feeling like, I'm so happy this is a part 1 because I want part 2. I want more of this. If you had told me at the beginning of the year that I would be like panting and just like drooling at the mouth to get Wicked part 2 next year, I would have thought you were crazy. But Wicked didn't just win me over. Wicked has become one of my favorite movies of this entire year. I thought the whole production, everything about it was just immaculate. It was fantastic. Such a well put together film, and some of the best filmmaking along with Dune Part 2 this year that I've seen in years. So If you're not a fan of musicals, don't think this one's going to win you over, but this is a musical. That's the type of movie it is. That's what they made, and they killed it. So I am giving Wicked a strong recommend. I don't know how that's going to be affected once part 2 comes out. I feel like even if part 2 is terrible, I'm still going to look back on this film very fondly because I had just a great time with it. It was one of my favorite theatrical experiences of the entire year. After a years-long intermission, we have finally returned to the land of Oz. Hi, my name's Zach, and today I'm giving you my review for the highly anticipated Wicked for Good. Before we get started, I started this YouTube channel because I cannot watch a movie without needing to talk about it afterwards. If that sounds like you, you're in the right place. Consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, comment down below your thoughts and opinions on Wicked for Good. Give me some context. What did you think of the previous Wicked? What do you think of the Wizard of Oz franchise as a whole? Comment down below. I'd love to hear your story. Now, for me, going into Wicked Part 2, I really enjoyed the first Wicked. In fact, Wicked was one of my biggest, most pleasant surprises to come out of last year. I just thought what Jon M and the entire cast and crew brought to the screen with the first Wicked was just pure movie magic, and it swept me off my feet. I was so engrossed, and I fell in love with this world and this adaptation of these characters from The Wizard of Oz. And the way that Wicked Part 1 ends with defying gravity and Elphaba and Glinda going on their separate paths, their separate ways, I was highly anticipating to see how they were going to continue the story in Part 2. So much so that I avoided almost every single conversation and information out there about Act 2 of the play in which this is based off of. Now, I had a couple people in my life tell me that Wicked Part 2 is basically the weaker part of the stage play. The story is going to be weaker. I did have some idea of where some of these characters were going to go in Part 2, but for the most part, I just went in with a clean slate, totally fresh, really anticipating and looking forward to seeing if Jon M is able to deliver the same magic that he brought in Wicked Part 1. With that said, let's get started with the review. Let's talk about what works about Wicked for Good. And because this was a continuous shoot, they didn't have to take down the sets and then rebuild everything and put it back together to shoot Part 2. They shot Part 1 and Part 2 basically simultaneously. So the production value and the amazing production design of the Land of Oz is still front and center here in this film. In fact, because this movie isn't confined to the school setting like the first part was, and we're able to go to so many different locations and different environments and places of the Land of Oz, that scope actually just gets enhanced and gets larger in this film. And it makes the epic conclusion that this is marketed to be feel that. It feels epic. It feels bigger. It feels larger than life than even Part 1 felt. And because you have that continuity, because you have that easy transition into Part 2, everything feels seamless from the first part. Part 1 and Part 2, they flow together really well. On top of that, the performances here don't take a dip at all. They do change a little bit because the nature of the story requires them to change. So whereas Ariana Grande's Glinda was a little bit more of the comic relief character in Part 1, her humor is dialed way back in this part because the story and the things that the character and the emotions that Ariana Grande has to depict as Glinda goes on this character journey, she has to bring a lot more emotional depth and a lot more dramatic beats to this film than comedic beats. And while I missed the humor, while I missed the comedic beats that Ariana Grande brought, there's still a little bit sprinkled out in this movie, but she does a really excellent job bringing the dramatics to the character of Glinda this time around. On top of that, alongside her, of course, Cynthia Erivo is also, once again, fantastic in this movie. She plays Elphaba pretty seamlessly and continuous of where we left her off in Wicked Part 2. She still is able to bring that sense of sympathy and empathy to the character, and throughout her journey in this movie as well, Cynthia Erivo, I actually think, did a little bit better of a job in Part 2, making this character so just one that you get behind and you really feel bad for all of this stuff that people are saying about her, and painting her as this wicked witch of the West, basically through like propaganda. Jeff Goldblum as the Wizard of Oz trying to hang on to that control. And I just feel like when you put these two films together and you watch this as this like 5.5 hour epic Wizard of Oz Elseworld story, it really works pretty well as one piece, especially when it comes to the production side and just the scope and scale of this world that Jon M was able to do. This is also the most musical of the two parts. I don't think the music is necessarily as good as Part 1. There's definitely not those memorable ones like Popular and, of course, Defying Gravity in this one, but all of the music I still quite enjoyed. And while there is a lot more of it, all of the performers here, Ariana Grande, of course, Cynthia Erivo, of course, sound just as good as they did in Part 1. They have tremendous range in their voices, and I think that this actually allowed them to show a bit more of range and subtlety in their range in the musical sequences than even Part 1 did. But of course, Part 1 has fantastic musical sequences and songs as well. These aren't as memorable or as great of songs on their own, but within the context of the movie, they still work pretty well. Jon M still incorporates some pretty cool techniques within these musical sequences. There's one musical sequence in particular. It's an Ariana Grande solo piece, and she's kind of surrounded by mirrors, and the way that the camera transitions through the mirrors and makes you think you're looking at her reflection in a mirror, but then they'll kind of trick you and show you that it's outside of the mirror. There's definitely some cuts and edits in there to add to the trickery. Unfortunately, I don't think there was as many energized and as many dynamic musical sequences than in the first. Like, the first one had that musical setting that was taking place in that library that was constantly moving, and at times it was rotating. There's nothing that interesting to look at or that engaging in the musical sequences in this one, but I still enjoyed listening to these performers all sing. And I guess I'm kind of getting into a little bit more of what didn't work for me, and unfortunately a lot of Wicked for Good didn't really work for me. So let's just move on. Let's talk about what did not work about Wicked for Good for me. And when it comes to the end of Wicked Part 1, where you get the wizard framing Elphaba as the Wicked Witch of the West, you're not quite sure where Glinda's gonna go with this at this time. Boom, to be continued. When you come back into this movie, it feels a little bit more aimless and uneven to me than Wicked Part 1 did. There are story elements of Wicked Part 1 that need to carry over into Part 2 that didn't get a conclusion, specifically with the animals losing their voices. That's a big part of this film. And that was a part of Wicked Part 1 that kind of failed to capture my interest and my attention. It just, they didn't go very deep into it, so I found it hard to care about it. It's a big component of this film, but it's not focused on enough, and it's not given the attention that I feel like it needs to make me care. And it's an important element to the story, but it also feels like a very underbaked element to the story. And that's kind of how I felt about a lot of this story of Wicked for Good, is they will introduce, this is what the story's about now, and then they kind of switch gears and go, no, this is now what the story's about. And then they'll switch gears again and they'll bring Dorothy in. And oh, now this is what the story's about. And all of these switches in the story, they feel very jarring at times, and they make for the story elements that we were focusing on, that we then transitioned out of and transitioned into something new. They feel less fleshed out. They feel less fully cooked, and thus they feel very underwhelming. And that's kind of the overarching feeling that Wicked for Good gave me. I felt very underwhelmed by a lot of directions and choices that they went with this part 2. Now, I'm not going to fully blame Jon M and the creatives behind it, because this is an adaptation of the stage play, a stage play I've not seen. So as far as I know, this is exactly how the stage play plays out. And they're just completely adapting it, taking it, translating it onto the big screen. In which case, I can't fault them too much because they're just retelling the story on the big screen. But when it comes to satisfying conclusions for things, I feel like Wicked for Good really dropped the ball on a lot of it for me. And a big part of that is the inclusion of the Wizard of Oz elements. Now, these are in the trailers, so this is not spoiling anything, but Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, the Lion, they're all in this movie very, very briefly. I will say that. But the Wizard of Oz story has to take place in the background of Wicked. And for me, bringing these two stories together, the marriage of them really didn't work all that well for me, because in the Wizard of Oz story, Elphaba has to be the Wicked Witch of the West. She has to be the villain, and they still have to depict her as a villain to those characters' stories. But then in Wicked, she has to be sympathetic and empathetic and the overall hero of the story. So it feels like they're trying to eat their cake and have it too, where they make Elphaba make choices that to me felt very out of character and out of place, so that she can play the villain in the Wizard of Oz character's story. But in terms of what's happening in the Wicked story, which is the main story that we are following in this sequel, in this part 2, it just came across as almost out of character. There was honestly a moment in this that felt very Anakin-like to me, where in Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin turns to the dark side, it feels very abrupt, it feels very jarring. And there's a moment where Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba has that kind of moment, and it just did not play well for me at all. I felt like it just was completely out of touch with the character that we had been following up until this point, and it just felt like a big leap, and it felt very forced to me. And that's where I kind of feel this movie stumbled a bit, because it can't just tell the story that we left off of in part 1. It has to also make sure that the story of the Wizard of Oz with Dorothy gets fulfilled and plays out the way it's supposed to play out in those stories. And I just don't feel like those two story elements come together in a seamless and natural way. Like, even in The Wizard of Oz, of course, I guess little spoilers for Wizard of Oz, but the Wicked Witch of the West wants the red ruby shoes that Dorothy's wearing. They have to find a way to incorporate that in this movie, and the way that they do, just it didn't feel natural. It didn't feel like it was a part of Wicked Part 2. It felt like it was a part of Wizard of Oz, and it just felt like a complete disconnect from the movie I was watching. And again, without getting into spoilers, because they have to both conclude the Wizard of Oz story and the Wicked story, where Elphaba is supposed to play two different roles in each story, I found this ending to be very dumb. I thought the way that they concluded this movie was very stupid and didn't make sense to me. I didn't buy into it, and as this movie just kind of went along, I found myself getting engaged in something, and then they quickly move away from it, and I found myself being a little bit more disengaged and disconnected from the film, and then I would find a point where I could jump back in, but then something else would happen, and I just kind of felt myself coming in and out of the film. So instead of being completely immersed and back in the world of Oz and in Wicked, I had a lot of trouble, honestly, getting into this film. And the best way that I feel like I can describe my overall feelings on Wicked Part 2 is when I went in to watch Wicked, I had no expectations whatsoever. I just wanted to see a new high-profile movie. And that movie ended up sweeping me off my feet. I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with these characters, fell in love with this world, and the filmmaking that was on display in front of me. And by the time that Wicked Part 1 ended, I wanted more. I left the theater so ready for Part 2, so eager to see what they were going to do and what they were going to bring with the rest of this story. And when I left Wicked Part 2, I had that same feeling, except it was not in a good way. I wanted more. I wanted more from this movie. I wanted more fulfillment. And when I walked out, I just felt like the movie itself was uneven, and I had an uneven experience with it. My expectations were pretty high this time as opposed to the first time, and I didn't feel like that they were met very well at all. And maybe that's just me. Maybe I had too high of expectations. Maybe if you saw the stage play and you know how the second act goes, maybe you'll be really into this because you're kind of expecting it to go the way that it goes and you already like how it goes. But for someone who just kind of walked in, really loving the first film, coming into this second film, there's definitely things that carried over that I enjoyed. The performances are great. The music is very nice to listen to. The production and the scope and scale of it all. I love the filmmaking and I love the look of these films. But I had a really hard time getting engaged in the story this time because it just kind of felt all over the place to me. So I can't believe I'm going to say this because I believe I gave a strong recommend to Wicked Part 1 and I really enjoyed that film. I gotta give a weak not recommend to Wicked for good. There's definitely things in here that are fun to see, good performances, and I think it's a well-made film. I just didn't really like the story and the way that the story was told and executed. And when I leave a film feeling underwhelmed and unsatisfied by the overall experience, it's unfortunately not one that I can recommend. Give me your thoughts on Wicked for Good down below in the comments. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. And don't just watch movies, talk movies. I will see you guys next time. Take care.